Greetings, brothers and sisters. Thank you for joining Africans Arise. My name is Ellie, and in this video, we're going to be talking about this year book once again, Nefer Volume 2, Anuk Asar by Ra-Un Nefer Amen. So I've done a few videos on this book already, and so if you've seen them, if you've seen the previous videos, that's all good. Thank you for joining me for this latest one. I will quickly review what I've talked about already on with the video. So with the last few videos. So we've been going through what's called the Tree of Life, which is a way of understanding man's faculties, a way of understanding how we behave, why we behave the way that we behave, and we went through the lower spheres of what man is. So we went through the lower faculties, the fleshly faculties, the fleshly parts of man, the what's the word? The fleshly part of man, the earthly part of man, the sensory part of man, the part of man, and by man I mean humans, people, the part of people that is the base elements basically of man. Sorry, just posting on Facebook. Here we go, live right now. And yeah, that was what we talked about in the first video, the lower faculties of man. Then in the second video, we talked about the higher faculties of man. And I want to send a shout out to yes, Aya, Christian Yaka Nation. What's going on, my family? Yeah, it's been a while. It's been a while since you've been on a live stream. Nice to have you on board. Peace and blessings to you. And yeah, thank you for joining. Thank you for joining live, nice and early. Hopefully, we can get through this together and have some interesting conversations relating to the subject matter. And I was just saying that in the second video that I did on the Tree of Life, we talked about the higher faculties of man, the will, the what was the other one? Ma'at, which is the law, the order, the synthesis. Which we've talked a lot about the left brain, or the right hemisphere of the brain and the left hemisphere of the brain, and how those two hemispheres of the brain kind of impacts the way that we behave and have different kinds of influences on the way that we behave. And then I was going to go on to talk about the highest faculties, if you like, the divine faculties of man. But it dawned on me that in order to do that, in order to talk about that, we're going to need to kind of track back a little bit to some things that Ra-Un Nefer Amen has said previously in the video, in his book, talking about what man is, because I think that's quite an important thing to be getting into. Is what is man? When we're talking about man has got this faculty, man's got that faculty, and so on and so forth. The question then comes, well, what is man? And this is what Ra-Un Nefer Amen talks about in the first couple of chapters, in the preface and the first chapter of the book, and that's what I'm going to talk about briefly in this video today. So once again, thank you for joining. If you're watching this on catch up, peace to you. Hope you find this nourishing. I should say, of course, I'm not setting myself up to be an expert or anything like that on any of these things, because I recognize that I am very much, what might you say, a neophyte. I'm very much new to all of this, and I'm just sharing my thoughts, sharing my views on, or my interpretation, on my reflections on what's written in this really important book. I think this is a really important book. I think it's a really insightful book, and we'll get into some of that in this video, hopefully today. All right. So I'm going to share the screen of the PDF, and hopefully we can get started with this discussion. So this is, you can actually get this book. You can actually get this book online for free. You can view this book online for free at any time. Just if you should have the skills. Just PDF, search for the PDF, search for something like Metu Nefer Volume 2 PDF, and that will find it. And yeah, let's get into it. So first of all, let's have a look. In the preface of the video, Ra-Un Nefer Amen shares shares this this image here. You might have seen something like this before, but I think it's a really important image, a really useful image, because he's basically talking about the conscious mind, or the conscious part of our being, and the subconscious part of our being. And the point he's making is a very simple point. He's basically saying, look, there's this part of our being up here, which is what we're aware of. This is our conscious mind, what we're aware of at all times. And the point he makes is the point that has been made by psychoanalysts and various different people. The point he makes is that the conscious part of our mind is the least powerful part of our being. The conscious part of our mind is, let's just find my notes here. The conscious part of our mind, well, let me read it actually. Let's have a look. What does he say here? Yeah, he says, above the line corresponds to the focus of the consciousness and the will, which is the faculty through which we indicate what we intend to do and accomplish. And below the line corresponds to the subconscious, which is the power in charge of carrying out our intentions. Metaphorized as an iceberg, the mind paints a frightening picture. We can readily see that the will is this tiny, lightweight projection above the waterline, while the subconscious carries the lion's share of weight and size. Pit them in a conflict between each other, and the outcome is easily predicted. Yet size and weight don't tell the whole story. Yes, there's even more gruesome news. In addition to being the bigger and stronger party, the subconscious, as the name implies, where are we? Sorry, yeah, as the name indicates, does its work behind our back, so to speak. It works for us, supposedly, sometimes, and it does it out of our sight and range of perception. Since it embodies the power to carry out our wants in life, it is too powerful a thing to be allowed to work outside of our view. And he basically goes on to talk about how, so you've got so here's the image again, really important image. You've got the subconscious, which is the power, and the will is above the line, which is the conscious. And he goes on to talk at some lengths that, you might want to do the most amazing things. You might want to do the most righteous, wholesome things. You might want to, the classic examples would be something like you might want to stay faithful to your partner. You might want to stop smoking. You might want to stop shoving some drugs up your nose, or whatever it might be. You might want to stop. You might want to start keeping. You might want to keep fit. You might be, I want to keep fit. I've got to start exercising. I need to start doing yoga. I need to start, all these things. I need to drink more water. I need to do this. Need to do that, and so on and so forth. That's just in your conscious mind. Yeah, you set your mind to it. Say, yeah, cool, boom. That's what I'm going to do. All right, let's do this. But your subconscious mind is there, like, that's where the power to actually do any of these things resides. And the subconscious basically says, yeah, no, that's not going to happen, fam. You might want to do that. You might want to stay faithful to your partner, but look at that, hot sunny day. You're walking around London or whatever town, whatever city, whatever area you live in, and you're seeing, bare pretty girl, bare pretty guys, whatever, whichever way you are, whichever sex you are, and you're seeing all this, and you're like, nah. And the point is that your subconscious, and I've talked a lot about this in the previous two videos, but your subconscious is where all of the programming has taken place. So your body has, all of the emotions, all of the feelings, all of the influences that you've had in your life, all of the learned behaviors and so forth, all of the memories, all of that is stored in our subconscious. And the subconscious is hugely powerful, and will basically stop us from doing the things that we know to do. Nothing controversial about this. We know that to be the case. And he gives the example of, quite a good example here, which is, he says down here, page 2, he says, the disunity between the conscious mind and the subconscious is reflected in those events in which you know something like the name of someone or your phone number or the answer to a question, and it's on the tip of your tongue and you just can't bring it to mind. The conscious mind says, yeah, I know this. And the will calls for it, but the subconscious, which is in charge of carrying out actions, will not give it up then. Maybe not until you're walking out of the examination room. There is an uglier side. You decide. Anyway, he talks about all that stuff. You might decide to give up a bad habit. Your health might depend on it, but your subconscious keeps you going back for more of the poison. Too much power to give to a servant. So far, so uncontroversial, I think. So conscious mind, subconscious mind. Now, what he says is in this. This is the preface. So he's introducing the book itself, and he basically says that the whole purpose of religion is to control the subconscious mind. And yeah, here we go. He says, the discontinuity between what you will and what you do also reveals a communication and understanding problem. Obviously, when you say to yourself that you will not continue to do something, or when the preacher gives you a lengthy sermon as to why you shouldn't, or let me just add, your favorite conscious speaker, gives a great speech about how we got to do this. We're black people. We need to start doing this. Yeah, the workers need to unite. We need to do this. We need to do that. We need to start coming together and creating our own businesses. We need to come together and create, whatever it might be. All these things that we hear, all that good stuff that we want to hear. We crave it. We want it. We seek out all these things. But the message does not descend, back to the book, into the subconscious. It's obvious that there is a great deal of ignorance about how the subconscious is influenced. It's of interest to note that Western education limits itself to influencing the conscious part of being. Working on the subconscious has been acknowledged to be limited to psychologists. Yet, we will see that the education of the population on the use of the subconscious is the domain of religion. He says, if prayer will help you achieve where the act of willing has failed, even if you credit ultimate success to divine intervention, union between your will and the subconscious must take place. Very interesting. Judging from the amount of failure in the world, we can safely conclude that there is a breakdown somewhere in the prayer process of people. So that's a very, very interesting point there with regard to prayer. Obviously, a lot of people are anti-Abrahamic religions or whatever it might be. But I've always, if you spent any time in sort of Pentecostal charismatic circles, in particular, evangelical kind of circles, of the Pentecostal type, charismatic type, you'll have come across, you'd have seen or heard at least some pretty amazing testimonies about how, through prayer and fasting and this, that, and the other, all sorts of wonderful, amazing outcomes have come about in people's lives. And there is that whole thing about praying with belief. That's how it's put in the Christian terminology. You must pray and you must believe. But what Nefer is saying here is that that's just basically a manifestation of your will uniting with your subconscious, your conscious minds uniting with your subconscious mind, agreeing, and boom, the thing will take place. Or the outcome comes about, the plan comes to fruition, and so forth. And yeah, it just makes me think about all the many, many things I've heard while in those circles, and even some of the things that are written in the book itself with regard to Yeshua, or Jesus, talking about, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, this will happen. And if you say to the mountain, be moved, and you believe, that will happen. Again, there'll be opponents of that tradition, but I kind of see what Nefer is talking about here with regard to the subconscious. But anyway, he goes on to say that the whole purpose of the book, whole purpose of Metu Volume 2, Anuk Osar, is about training the subconscious mind. It's about training the subconscious. It's about taking control of the subconscious. It's about, where are we? It is about taking control of the subconscious and bringing it into the service of your will, basically. So yeah, so that's all very interesting. One thing he says is, so he talks about how the whole point of the book, he says that Osirian religion, or Osirian spirituality, which is what this book is all about, well, I'll read it here. He says, "It's my purpose in writing the Medu Neter, eventually a 6-volume set, to give the reading public a working knowledge and practical guide to the spiritual way of life developed by the Africans of Kemet, ancient Egypt, the Canaanites, the Indus Kush civilization, the pre-Aryan blacks who created the yoga system of India." And in volume 1 of this book, I reintroduced the Kemetic oracle, the Medu Neter, to the world, and explained the Kemetic system of meditation and spiritual cultivation, which is something I'm going to have to read. In this volume, I have detailed the Osirian religion, which was the leading system used by the ancient Egyptians and the Kamau to develop their people to the level that enabled them to give the world the foundations of civilization. And I mean, wow, that's a big claim. Often you hear people talking about, how did the people of ancient, how did the Egyptians, or the Kamau, the Cometians, whatever you want to call them, how did they build the pyramids? How did they build all these wondrous works and so on? Well, Nefer is basically saying here, because they were elevated, they understood the principles, they understood the way to ascend to our higher level of being. And there's one thing he says in here which makes me laugh. He says, "How to use this book. Although chapters 11 to 18 give exercises to perform, it is advisable that the book be read several times along with rereadings of volume 1 before embarking on the initiation program." I'm like, I haven't even read all of this volume 2 yet, and I've only got volume 2, and I've had it for about 10 years, 15 years maybe. And he's talking about rereading it several times before actually moving on to doing the work. So wow, that is that's discipline. That's discipline that he's calling for there. Anyway, all right. So let's go to chapter 1. And in chapter 1, on page 7, he takes aim at religions. Basically, he says, imagine that you've come up with a new system for teaching dogs to jump through a hoop, and it is failing while other systems are succeeding. Since dogs cannot teach themselves to perform this trick, you must blame yourself and your system for the failure. The same is true of the behavior required of people. If they are to achieve personal and social harmony and prosperity in their case, the process requires their unlearning undesirable behaviors and replacing them with their opposite, as well as awakening and developing dormant talents and faculties. These are clearly not tricks that they can teach themselves, yet the proponents of dominant behavior shaping systems in the world today, religionists, psychologists, sociologists, educators, philosophers, etc., excuse the failure of their systems by shifting the blame over to the people whose negative behavior is caused by the failure of the so-called professionals to provide proper acculturation. Things are the way they are, they claim, because people are hypocrites, ignorant, evil, sinners, etc. They fail to realize that if people were not as they are, there would be no need for behavior shaping institutions. These were invented to raise people out of their shortcomings. And, fair enough, because, the classic case of Jamaica. Jamaica is a country which has, churches on it. I think it's got something, or it had, or it still has, the highest number of churches per square mile or whatever than any other country in the world or something. Loads and loads of churches, which you can take as a proxy for loads and loads of Christians, or loads and loads of religion, Christian religion. And yet, unfortunately, that beautiful country with these beautiful people is racked with violence, with political violence, all kinds of economic woes and so on. And this isn't to blame the people of Jamaica, these Africans who were enslaved and taken there, and who have been, exploited ever since that to this day by some of their own as well. But the point right Nefer is saying is that, look, how can it be that there's so much religion around, there's so much church, there's so many churches, how can it be that there's so many mosques around in these places, temples or whatever it might be, and yet there is so much wrong with the world? And he says, listen, you know what the issue is? The issue is that all of these religions and behavioral systems, he also talks about psychology and psychotherapy and all this sort of stuff. The problem is they've got the wrong understanding of what man is, and that is what the subject of this video is. What is man, actually? So let's read. He said, I'll read it. Yeah. This shift of responsibility, i.e. blaming people for the problems rather than the systems for the problems, is not evidence of a grand Machiavellian plot, except for that small elite, but the result of total ignorance and lack of recognition of the true basis for a behavior shaping system. In other words, all of the dominant behavior shaping systems and institutions in the world are based on a conception of man and God, in some cases, that does not match reality. And what would you expect if you attempted to grow desert plants in a swamp and failed to realize the mismatch? And he talks about how, you know, you're trying to grow a plant that is meant to be grown in the desert in a swamp, and then you might, you know, as it's failing, you might, you know, reward people for coming up with cures for certain diseases of the plant that's trying to grow in its wrong environment and all this sort of stuff. But he's saying that actually the issue isn't these diseases and so on, really. The issue is that that plant was not meant for that environment. So he says, you've got to understand what man's nature is. And he says that, well, what is man's nature? He says, if you were to ask someone in the ancient Kemet, what is man? The answer would have been Osar. And obviously, Osar, what does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? And this is the point of this first chapter 1. So the subject of this book, as he says, is behavior shaping, and he's basically, you know, presenting this system that he's going to talk about in this book as the way that the people of ancient Kemet shaped behavior, and they did this on the basis of an understanding or an idea about what man is. So let me scroll here. Let's go to page 9 here. Yeah. So he talks about how, here we go. Knowing nothing of, talking about these Western systems that are failing, knowing nothing of man's origin and where they must take man in his or her growth, these systems erect very sophisticated, ignorant theories and practices that take his or her lower stage of growth as the essence of his being. Our ancestors in Kemet developed a profound insight into man's psychological, i.e. spiritual, evolution, the culmination of which they symbolized as the god Osar, or Osiris. Unlike Western behavior shaping systems, which are based on man's lower being with its animalistic and lower intellectual faculties, even though these have given us supercomputers and satellites, the ancient African civilizations based their behavior shaping system, religious initiation, on the higher parts of man's being, wherein reside the divine elements that created him/her and administer his or her life. While the Western systems foster all kinds of behavior that cater to and strengthen the lower part of being, the African systems seek to elevate man to his divine essence. So you can see where he's going with this. His understanding would be that man is, at essence, we are divine. So let's go to page. One thing he talks about how in Western, in a lot of science fiction, you'll see that even when it comes to talking about the future, the Western mind projects violence and war and, you know, dystopia. Dystopia is very, very popular. You can even look at The Matrix. You know, what else? Inception, maybe, you know, all of these kinds of films. Hunger Games, Squid Games, all of these kinds of you know, sci-fi things, projecting into the future, even Star Wars to an extent. What you see is war, violence, cheating, brutality, unfaithfulness, and so on and so forth. You don't see you don't see any you don't really see any sign of spiritual enlightenment, spiritual ascending to a higher level of being. And Rowan Nefer argues that, look, this betrays what is wrong with the West. This betrays what's wrong with the Western mindset, because they are focused on man's lower faculties rather than man's higher faculties. And one thing I'd say to that is, it's interesting to contrast that with Afrofuturism or African futurism, which do center spirituality, which do center spiritual growth, which do center, which delve into, futures where we are in a higher level of being, a higher level of consciousness, and in tune with our environment, in tune with nature, in harmony with one another, and so forth. We see a lot more of that in Afrofuturism and African futurism than you do in Western futurism. So, what is man? Here we go. He really gets into the crux of the matter on page 10. And here we go. Before laying down the teachings about man's nature, the knowledge of self, as developed by the ancient Black civilizations, let's explore our common experience that we may be able to see that these teachings are not just a model, but an extraction from reality itself. I'm sure there have been times that you had an emotion visit you and you found yourself struggling with it. You found yourself thinking, even though I want it badly, I am not going to give in to it. I know I am not going to give in to it. I know better now. I am not supposed to be drinking that, smoking that, dealing with that person, etc. It is clear that there is a struggle going on, and common sense will tell you that for there to be a struggle, there needs to be at least two separate entities. But the exact nature and identity of these two combatant entities are confused by the structure of Western thought patterns as reflected in its languages. In the preceding statement, we saw that it is normal for people involved in an inner struggle to say that it is I that is desiring so-and-so at the same time that it is I that is struggling against it. There is no understanding on the part of being in which the energies that are experienced as desires and emotions is separate from the part of being that is opposed to them. In the course of this book, we will come to see that the part of being in which the energies of emotions manifest themselves, like the likes, the dislikes, the pleasures and displeasures, is not the same as the part of being that truly represents what we refer to as I or myself. Very, 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 very interesting. Very, very powerful for me. Just that in itself is like, right, okay, oh yeah, good point. I'm not fighting against myself, actually. There are different parts of being which are fighting against themselves, fighting. This duality of being, to which we will devote a great deal of attention, is the reason for coining the word individual. He says this thing about individual is the joining of indivisible and duality, but I'm not sure if that's actually true, to be honest. But anyway, goes down here. Let's denote the higher half of being as the self, which in this book will always be capitalized to distinguish it from the common usage. It is in reference to this part of being, that is the higher half, our higher being, which by the laws of its nature is incapable of experiencing any emotion, that the pronoun I is applicable. The other half, the lower half of being, could be designated as the person. This is the part of being that contains the qualities making up our personality, emotional patterns, and so on. As it is impermanent, i.e. subject to change, there are many behaviors you have changed over the years. You cannot designate it as your identity, yourself. As the years go by, you may come to realize that while there is a part of you that undergoes constant change, there is another part that remains always the same. Your awareness of this difference depends on your degree of detached. Where are we? Your degree of detached. Got to stop looking at a different part of, detached introspection, which is enhanceable through meditation. It's important to realize that in any subject, identity can only be established on the permanence of qualities. Very interesting. So there's two parts to our being: the higher half, the higher part of our being, and the lower half. The higher part of our being is the true us. It's Nefer calls it the self. That is the true I. Is the unchanging part of our being, and doesn't change. Whereas the lower half of our being, the lower part of our being, is the personality, is the fleshly part, is the part of us that changes all the time. And he goes on to say, a major source of the problems in the dominant behavior shaping systems in the world is that they have been designed for the lower part of man's being as his identity. And the problem, he goes on to argue here that the lower part of our being can't discriminate between good and evil, right and wrong, and so forth. The lower part of our being, he says, is, but well, let me just read it here. He says, there is nothing in its nature, that is the lower part of our being, that has the ability to discriminate between right and wrong, good and evil. What can you expect when you base a behavior shaping system and institution that addresses this part of being on issues of right and wrong? We will come to see that the correct approach to such systems is to base them on the development and strengthening of the expression of the higher part of being in the day-to-day life of the individual, since it cannot be affected by the corrupting influences of the world. In other words, if the strongest part of your being is the self, which by the laws of its being cannot be motivated by pleasure or displeasure, then you are free to allow only such behavior where the likes and dislikes of the lower part of being are in harmony with what is right. And he goes on to say that the ancient Africans understood this. They understood this point, that the aim, the way to shape behavior in the right direction was to awaken the sleeping part of ourselves, our sleeping self, the self, which is the higher part of our being. And as a result, they developed systems which put names to this higher part of our being. So in Kemet, you called it Osar. Then you've also got the Obatala, which I think is the Yoruba system, possibly. The Shiva, which is used in India, and so forth. And he goes on to say that he makes a point that in Kemet, identification with Osar was what people strove to do. Osar became the personification of our higher state of our higher being, and the purpose was to awaken that. And he says, it's important to focus completely on this statement, for it is the key to comprehending the entire Kemetic mythological literature, Osarian religion, psychology, sociology, and social structures of traditional African civilizations. Where are we? Yeah. So it's all about awakening the inner us, the inner true us, which is our higher self, which is unchanging, which is unchangeable. And if we can awaken that part of our being, the true part of our being, ourself, then we can become the people we should be, and we can become the societies that we should be. Any other efforts to bring about changes in our own personal individual lives, or to bring about changes on a societal level, or any of these kinds of things, is doomed to failure, Nefer argues, because they are based on the lower part of our being. So then he talks a little bit about God's attributes, and he says that to understand man, you need to first understand God. And he says something which I really like. He talks more about this in the future chapter, which I'll talk about in a different video. But he says that, this is on page 13, he says that since God, here we go. The entire manifestation the key to understanding God resides in its creation of the world. The entire manifestation of reality can be reduced to two root complementary categories: consciousness/will and substance/energy. The creation of the world must therefore be understood as the action of a consciousness that wills substance, matter, energy, to assume the various forms in and as the world. It's important to understand that the things making up the world are modifications of an unstructured substance, which, by its essential lack of structure, can assume any form. This is the source of the stupendous infinite number and types of forms making up the world, and it's the basis of God's attribute of omnipotence. Now, what I like, he talks a lot more about this in chapter 2. So I won't dwell too much on this, because chapter 2 is much more about what is God and going into the kind of metaphysics of it all. But he says that basically what he's arguing here is that energy is matter, energy. You've got consciousness / will on one hand and matter / energy on another hand. And this really speaks to me because, matter is, you could argue that matter or energy is permanent, can't be destroyed, can't, when something dies, for example, the matter, the physical matter doesn't die. It's not destroyed. One of the things I used to do when I was really, really young, I used to, like really, really young, I used to try and imagine nothingness. Very funny thing I used to do. I used to try and imagine, okay, what would it be like for there to be absolutely nothing? I know, strange child that I was. So I used to do that. I used to sit there and just think, okay, try and imagine nothing. And it used to freak me out because I couldn't imagine nothing. I couldn't imagine non-existence. Whenever I tried to think about, okay, well, what could nothing look like? All I could keep thinking of was something to and so anyway, the point, it was almost like as a young child, I kind of understood that there's no such thing as nothing, because matter cannot be destroyed. That's kind of like what my understanding was. Matter can't be destroyed. You can't destroy it. When something dies, it just, for example, an animal, it just takes a new form. It just takes another form. When a person dies, their body goes into the ground, decomposes, turns into a different form. I've been talking to my eldest son quite a bit recently about this, and the other day I was let me just go on. Yeah, the other day I was talking to my eldest son, and I was talking about because there were a load of brown leaves, autumn leaves around, and I was explaining to him that, yeah, look, these leaves are dead. He said, why are they on the floor? Why are they brown? I said, because they're not attached to the tree anymore. So they're not attached to the life source. So they've died. And then I could see him looking at the leaves like, and I said, yeah, but when I say they died, they're still there. What's going to happen is they're going to decompose. They're going to break down into very small pieces, and then they'll go into the ground, and they'll help the grass to grow. They'll help new things to grow. So it's a cycle of life, and it's that cyclical nature of reality that speaks really strongly to me. Everything is cyclical. Matter is cyclical. It never ends. It's never destroyed. It just takes new forms. And what Nefer is talking about here is that consciousness. What he's talking about here is that creation was the act of the will upon the substratum. So upon the matter / energy initially, or prior to the forms that coming into being, this matter was formless. Was unformed. It was just one unformed whole. And then creation involved the consciousness, this single consciousness acting upon matter to bring about all of the multifarious things that have come into being. So that's interesting. But as I say, that is something that he talks a lot more about in chapter 2. So I won't talk too much about that in this video. But he talks in chapter 1 here. He talks about the attributes of God, which you'll have heard before. So omnipotence, omnipresence, and omniscience, knowledge of all. And he contrasts that with man. He contrasts that with our limitations. And he contrasts that with the fact that man is, we are limited, in time and space. We are not. We have limited knowledge. We have limited power, and we have limited presence. We're only in one place at any given time. And he, as I said, we'll go on to talk more about that in the next video, because he talks more about that in chapter 2. But he says on page 50, well, he disagrees with the idea that these limitations make up the essence of who we are. And where does it, I've put page 15, but where are we? Yeah, so let's have a look here. Basically, he says that in the Western sciences, the limitation of here we go. Yeah. So down here it says, while the Western religions and behavioral scientists take these limitations to represent the essence of man's being and theorize and prescribe accordingly, the African behavioral sciences, especially of Kemet, understood that man's ability to know and to do and to be is essentially unlimited. And he says, what has kept most people from understanding this is that man's unlimited potential is subject to manifest itself through time and space, while God's potential is not, because it manifests instantly. Incidentally, this is the great secret hidden in the mystery of time and space, which conceal man's unlimited abilities. What God can do in an instant, so can man if given enough time. He may have to reincarnate, be born again several times, and have the right conditions. So that's interesting. So clearly he holds to the idea of reincarnation there, although he doesn't talk about it much in the sections of this book that I've talked about so far. So anyway, so he's talking, man is our true nature, our true essence is unlimited, undefined, unlimited, oneness with the single consciousness. And then should I read this? Yeah, I'm going to skip some of these things because it's going to be covered in the next chapter. He talks about the whole being made in the image of God. And he says that this is something that's been spoken about in various different, religious texts, in particular the Genesis, most famously for a lot of us. God made man in God's likeness. And he says that it's readily clear that the likeness of God in which man is made cannot refer to man's physical or human psychological makeup. It can refer to one and only one set of the qualities embodying the three attributes of God as noted above. Man has been made with the same unlimited potential to know, achieve, and to be. In other words, man shares with God the same quality of powers, though not the same quantity or capacity at any given time. The classical, though not exact, analogy is that of a drop of water having the same life-giving properties as an ocean, but not the same capacity to hold the numberless things that can be fitted into the latter. We must realize that the master principle governing our lives, and should therefore govern the framing of religion, sociology, psychology, government, education, family, institution, etc., is the notion of who is man. What kind of being is he, her? Behavioral professionals at the front of the efforts to teach people how to be successful in life are unanimous in their agreement on the need and importance of identifying ourselves with thoughts that stress an unlimited potential within us. They constantly warn against accepting thoughts that limit our abilities to achieve goals that are humanly possible. If you say you can't, you will be unable to achieve and prove yourself right, only because you believe so. And if you say you can, you will achieve and be equally right. So he talks about how, various kind of modern day gurus, have taught this. Various modern day gurus, he mentions Norman Vincent Peale, Les Brown, Anthony Robbins, etc. And then he says, if we consider the ocean to be God's domain, and a drop of water to represent the realm of human domain, possibilities rather, then we can see that man has been given the same kinds of divine powers that God possesses. What the modern gurus of success are saying is that while all people are born with the potential to achieve, all that is possible to all men, individuals are in the habit of accepting negative thoughts that limit them to a minor percentage of this potential. While the modern gurus try to solve this problem by stressing the various elements of man's behavior, i.e., thinking, imagination, discipline, self-image, and so on, the ancient African model is centered on the equation of man's essential nature with God. A very potent argument can be made that equating God with man as a dynamic aid to success can be based on the principle that who or what you think you are will determine how you think, how you use your imagination, creativity, your level of self-discipline, your actions, and so forth. If a person defines himself as a soldier, he will not tend to seek political solutions to problems or to negotiate. If you define your ability to succeed as being dependent on the environment, how would you perform in life as long as your environment is hostile to your success, if others succeed in manipulating your environment against you? Yet the Kemetic religion does not equate man with God for these reasons, although such a belief will play a potent role in success. It bases it on the fact that God has actually incorporated itself and its attributes into man's spirit, in fact, constituting man's self and her true faculties. So this is what he's basically saying there is that, well, so what? What does all of this matter? Who cares if the true essence of man is God, basically? If we made in God, who cares? What does it matter? He's basically saying that who you think you are will determine what you become. And he said, what I really like about what he said there was that, rather than looking at just little particular areas of your life and saying, okay, I need to start eating better, I need to start doing exercise, I need to become more fit, okay, I need to become more whatever it might be, rather than compartmentalizing life into these little things and going to specialists to help you out in these areas. I love the fact that what he's saying here is that it's not about that. It's not about these compartmentalizations. You've seen in previous videos, I was talking about the Sebek mindset, the Sebek faculty, which breaks things down and doesn't see things holistically. Rather, it's about looking at, it's about taking an approach that is holistic and that addresses things, the whole. And this is what I love. This is why I agree with what he's saying here with regard to, first and foremost, you've got to come from a position, or you've got to have a perspective which is basically saying, well, first and foremost, what am I? What are we, first and foremost? And then working from there. So yeah, that's why all of this stuff is actually of any kind of interest. He then, I'll be finishing up soonish, but he then talks about, actually, yeah, nearly finished. He then talks about, he says this, he says, the problem with Western behavioral institutions is that they all define man according to the lower part of his being, essentially subject to sensualism, emotionalism, and identification with his physical body. They all fail to realize the folly in prescribing positive thinking and beliefs to a man who views himself as being essentially limited, sensual, and emotional, i.e. sinful or human. And he points out, this is on page 18, he points out that the word human actually means humus man of the earth. And that's really interesting to me, because yeah, that is basically, yeah, peace out, Tito District, my sister, just to get that right this time. nice to have you on board. Thanks for joining. Enough respect and blessings. And yeah, he talks about how, he says, in the same manner that children have the potential of adult behavior and expression within, waiting to be nurtured into manifestation, so do adults have the divine potential slumbering within. We don't give the child formulas to think like an adult. We grow her into adulthood. This is the Kemetic approach. Unlike the Western systems that guide individuals to success in specific areas of life, career, marriage, selling, while failing in most cases in all other areas, The Osirian religion guides the individual to realize his/her divinity to become Osar, which will automatically make for success in all areas of life without specifically focusing on any particular one of them. So yeah, that is I love that. I'm loving that, frankly, and I agree. And so anyway, where was I? Yeah, just so yeah, we've talked about the faculties of man. So he talks about how in ancient Kemet, there's various texts which show that people were always basically trying to identify themselves with Osar. He also says, interestingly, he says something right near the end of the chapter, that this is something that is also evident in other African systems. So he says the identification of man with God is also evident in other parts of Africa. Among the Bantu, which is my people are supposed to be part of the Bantu group, the categorical name for both God and man is Muntu or Mtu. All other things and energies are Bintu, which is Kintu in the singular. God and man are grouped together because they both share in Ubwenge, which is the power to create and affect the course of things through the agency of the will acting upon the spirit. It is said that a naughty child I'll read that. It said that a naughty child tried to put his teacher on the spot by asking the following: if man, given that he is Muntu, ordered the sun to depart from its course, will it obey? To which the teacher promptly replied, of course the sun will obey man, only that a greater Muntu gave it its course and told it never to depart from it. It's the same principle at work as when a person's desire to preserve his family is overpowered by the desire to drink. I'm not sure what exactly he means by that, but anyway, basically that's just a kind of side note there. But as we see, the basic point, to summarize, the basic point that Ra Nefer Amen is making in chapter 1 of this book, which is Medinater, however you pronounce it, volume 2, Anuk Osar, is that I'll summarize all the things I've talked about. First of all, man's true essence is the higher essence. He talks about how man has two parts to us: a higher part, and a lower part of our being. The higher part of our being is the true part of our being. That is the self, and this self is unchanging. It can't be, doesn't change over time. Is the true who we are. He talks about how the true essence of what something is must be determined by its unchangeable its unchangeable feature. Whereas the lower part of our being, which he refers to as the person, is not the true us, because this lower part of our being is the flesh, is subject to change through time. Our personalities, our likes, our dislikes, all this kind of stuff changes over time. So how can that be the true us when it's constantly changing? And I think that's a really important point, because you think about how much of, it's countercultural, because we're taught to identify ourselves with this, with the physical, with our personalities. We fight to the death to protect our personalities. I suppose you could call it the ego. We fight, we struggle to protect our likes and dislikes and so forth. But that's not our true self. That is not the true who we are, the true us, the true I. And he says that behavioral systems which focus on the lower part of our being are doomed to fail, because the lower part of our being can't elevate itself. The lower part of our being cannot be subject to, it can't obey right and wrong. It can't ascend to a higher state of being and so forth, because it's just subject to blind forces, energies. As I've talked about in the previous videos, we talked about how energies, emotions, talked about astrology, how we're even subject to the planets and the stars and so forth. We're subject to how people treat us. We react, fight or flight, all these kinds of reactions. That is not our true self. And there's no point in trying to address that part of our being as part of religion or psychology or whatever it might be, because it's doomed to failure. It just cannot work. It's like trying to get a plant that is meant to be grown in the desert. It's like trying to get that plant to grow in a swamp. It's just not going to happen. Was that right? Yeah, that's the analogy. I think that's the analogy he used. What he says is that the people of ancient Kemet, similarly to people in other ancient parts of the world and in other parts of Africa in particular, understood that the key to behavior change, the key to improving human behavior, improving the world, improving our social institutions, improving our societies, and having harmony and love and peace and so forth, all that kind of good stuff. The key to that lay in people identifying themselves with our higher self, which is, we all share in this higher self. It's all one. He's going to talk about in the next chapter, which I'll talk about in the next video. And that is where we have initiation, Kemetic, Osarian initiation, all these kinds of forms of initiation in various different parts of Africa, whether it be amongst the Yoruba, the various Bantu people, the people in Congo, and various other parts of the global South as well, if you want to call it that, and even some of these indigenous. It would have been the same amongst Europeans prior to the advent of modernity and capitalism and all that kind of stuff. The idea was initiation, to initiate ourselves into a system of self-development. But it wasn't self-development in our fleshly power. It was self-development through what he's going to talk about in this book. The Kemetic initiation system was all about how to transform ourselves by identifying ourselves with our true essence. And in the Kemetic system he's talking about here, that self was personified as this entity here, which is Osar or Osiris. And that is it. Now, in the next video, I will talk about more. I'll go into a little bit more detail about his Ra'u Nefer Amen's ideas or thoughts or teachings on God. What is God? Because again, I think it's really fascinating, really interesting. I know a lot of people who come from different kind of spiritual traditions, Abrahamic spiritual traditions, will find some of this stuff questionable. But personally, I'm kind of eclectic. I can't imagine that truth, can be contained in one of these little boxes that we have, these religious little boxes, whether it be Christianity or Islam or Buddhism or Voodoo or whatever it might be, Kemetic, spirituality. It cannot be that everything we need to understand and know can be contained in those little boxes, particularly if we're talking about this unlimited essence being the truth of who we are. So I would just encourage those of you who might be coming from those kind of perspectives and is feeling a little bit uncomfortable to just think, God is bigger than religion, man. God, these big things that we're talking about are much bigger than our little boxes, our little ghettos, our little spiritual religious ghettos that we want to kind of put people into, so or put reality into, put the truth into. So that's all I'd say on that. So yeah, that's been me. Thank you very much for watching, everybody who's joined. Hope you found it of interest. I hope you found it thought-provoking. Again, you can get this book. You can get this book on line PDF. You can get the PDF of Metu Volume 2 online. Just search. Go to your favorite search engine and just search. excuse me. Just search Ra'u Nefer Amen, or just search Metu Volume 2 and PDF, and you'll get it. And yeah, exactly. So thank you, Hadrianus 9. Absolutely, truth is bigger than concepts. Yeah, exactly. And what I'm really, because there's a question here as well. There's a question here. Ra'u Nefer Amen here is talking about meditation and all this kind of stuff as being the key tool by which we can connect ourselves and become more aware of our true essence and connect with the unity between us and so forth. But that's there are other. It's about that experience, you know. It's about that experience. And there are other ways of experiencing as well, you know. Other systems, lots of systems have different ways of experiencing that I'm quite interested in kind of looking into. But I think it is about experience. The key, what I've learned from the parts of this book that I've read so far, is that it's very much about going beyond labels. It's very much about going beyond concepts, even very much about going beyond teaching. Even, it sounds weird, but all those things, as good as and wholesome as they are, particularly if they're, you know, uplifting teachings and so forth, are only ever really going to be, you're only ever going to be looking at things from the outer. You're only ever really going to be you know, studying things superficially if you're only ever relying on words and teachings and books and all this kind of stuff. The key is it's experiencing. It's about knowing rather than believing, you know, I think. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking on that. And shout out to you, Tito District. So yeah, interested in looking into traditional African spiritual systems, we'll rewind the broadcast to catch what I missed from your presentation. Thank you very much. Yeah, I hope you find it of interest and use. And yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely interested as well in our African spiritual systems. The older I get, the more I realize that some of these simple looking systems that we have, you know, some of the simple, apparently simple phenomenology, you know, outward appearance of like, you know, the sangomas and the whatever babalawos and all this kind of stuff. Outwardly, look at these people doing what they're doing. You just, you know, it's like, that doesn't look very impressive, does it? Where's your temple? Where's your gigantic edifice to your god or whatever, you know? So that's, you know, one of the things that turns us, I think, that turns a lot of our people away from our African spiritual systems, is partly because we're brainwashed. You know, we're Eurocentric brainwashing. We tend to think that, oh, if these people are looking simple, then there's nothing to learn from it, you know. But the older I get, the more I realize that these people are onto something far, far, far deeper than you know, than I can understand in my current lower kind of way of thinking, if you like. So yeah, yeah, big ups to yourself, and you know, certainly do let me know, man. Let me know. Share your understanding. There's a lot of. I'm really pleased to see there's quite a few brothers and sisters out here, mainly brothers actually, but who are, for example, going through this book as well, studying this book on YouTube, and also just kind of starting to piece together some of these things and connect things together. Because one of the things, and I will stop now. One of the problems, I think, is the way that, you know, talking about the segregation, how it's like, oh, okay, right. Oh, people are probably looking at it thinking, oh, Ellie's becoming a Kemetic. He's getting into Kemet stuff. He's going to start talking about Hotep this and Hotep that, you know. But I think it's about seeing the commonalities in these things. The way I see it is that, you know, all of these different traditions have they're onto something. They're all getting at the truth in their own kind of way. They're all getting little snippets of it here, little snippets there, little snippets there. And I think our job, we should be eclectic. We should be able to kind of learn from all of them and take it on and experience it in a way that is ultimately, you know, again, the saying goes, you judge the tree by its fruit. Ultimately, it's all about the fruit in our own lives and the fruit in our communities and in our societies and so forth. That's what kind of matters. So I'm kind of less interested in outward labels and much more interested in, well, let's see the love amongst people. Let's see the love in your heart. Let's see the love in your actions, in your families, in your relationships, in your parenting and so forth. And that's the thing that's motivating me in all of this, is because I've seen that there's a lot of darkness sounds a little bit dramatic, but basically there's a lot of heaviness and hurt and bad energy, basically, that I have within me, you know, with fear and anger, frustration, and all this kind of stuff. And you know, I'm so grateful for my children, because they have helped me they've helped to open my eyes to this, because they've not learned how to just shut their eyes and let these things go. They'll behave how they behave, and it brings out these certain things in my behavior. And for me, it's all about self-development. This is basically these videos that I'm doing are kind of like a bit of a diary of my growth or development. I didn't mean to. I had no plans of doing this kind of stuff, but this is what it's basically turned out that I'm going to be doing over, at least for the next short-term future, because I need to do it. And actually this is like a space I have to be able to share some of these things and to learn from others as well. So anyway, thank you, my brothers and sisters. Thank you for watching, everyone who's watched. Do like the video if you haven't already liked it. And if you haven't been able to comment on the live stream comments, then please do comment on the underneath and the comments below. Any insights in particular, I'll be really keen to hear. Any truths that you'd like to share, any nuggets of inspiration and lines of further inquiry, or clarifications and improvements, if that's the right word, of things that I've said, then bring it on, family, and I'll be really pleased. All right. Okay. Take care, one and all. Peace and blessings, and hopefully see you again next week, similar time, hopefully next week, to carry on our discussion in this tremendous book called Metu Volume 2 by Anuk Asar by Ra Nefer. All right. Peace.